The first thing they took was my favorite screwdriver, which told me everything about the station's sense of humor. Most ports confiscate railguns and blades. Vescari Freeport had a clerk with 3 eye stalks and a label maker, and he peeled the tag from my driver as lovingly as a jeweler. Potentially weaponizable, he chirped, feeding it into a bin that sighed shut like a coffin. My name's Jax Rourke, I said. I'm here to buy xenon tanks, a hull patch, and maybe a beer, not overthrow your government. Intent is not part of the form, the clerk replied, sliding a tablet toward me. His name tag called him Bach. Please declare all items capable of projection, incision, abrasion, ignition, or intimidation. Intimidation? Your jacket counts. They took the jacket, which hurt, and then my utility belt, multi-tool, pocket torch, fork, and the zip ties I kept for the air recycler that never stayed shut. When my boots triggered the detector for subdermal shrapnel mass, they offered me slippers with little smiling starfish on them. By the time I stepped into the concourse, I looked like a tourist lost in the wrong sector. At my shoulder, our ship's courier AI whispered through the bone conduct headset buried under the skin near my ear, the only thing Bach couldn't laser scan without a warrant. Nia sounded like my grandmother when she disapproved. Your purchase list just doubled. My diagnostics show a microfracture in the port coil. I told you not to let the coil think about Tuesdays, I muttered. You are not funny without your jacket, Nia said. Also, without your tools. We threaded through Vescari's Central Mall, a ring of stalls around a greenhouse where something with too many leaves was photosynthesizing like it owed rent. Without tools, everything looked like a tool. That's when the alarms hit. A ripple of red lights pulsed down the spine of the station, and the plant in the greenhouse shuddered its leaves with a hiss. Every creature within 200 meters looked up with the same expression, the merchant's blend of opportunity and fear. Nia's voice sharpened. External docking detected. Non-compliant. 12 signatures. Tell me they're friendly tourists. They arrived in a corvette named Mandatory Tithe. Pirates. Or privateers with paperwork. Vescari's mooring fees were low because the station didn't pay for a defense grid. It paid for a door you could lock yourself. Shopkeepers shoved items and customers behind shutters. My eyes tracked exits, counted cameras, measured distances out of habit I could never fully unlearn. Nothing on me but slippers and a hazard waiver for being human. I pivoted toward the nearest security panel to request guidance, then remembered that panels were tools, and tools were illegal, and also that Vescari's idea of security was Bach with a whistle. Nia, I said, route me to the port authority. Already trying, Nia said. They're busy printing forms that confirm they're not responsible. The concourse shook as the corvette bullied its way into a docking ring. I pictured my ship, the Sparrow, 2 piers over, sitting with her coil fretting and her cargo of frozen culture media more valuable than my left leg. The pirates would want credits first, slaves second, parts last. A lanky alien with translucent armor, a Vescari steward named Plint I'd bartered with earlier for a cheaper refuel, scuttled out from under a shutter and grabbed my sleeve, realizing a second later I no longer had sleeves. He grabbed my forearm instead. Human Jax. You are singularly loud even when you are quiet. Can you fight? Not legally, I said. Good, Plint said, panicked. The Tithe crew prefers legality. They extort via auctions. They sell the right to strip your ship while you watch. It is documented. Auctions? They've scheduled one for the Sparrow. In 1 hour. Of course they have. Right then, an idea walked by on 6 legs dragging a crate. A maintenance drone, Model K7, bumped a loose panel and shed a confetti of rivets. No one noticed the hardware dusting the floor like rain. I did. The concourse, which had just been a marketplace, had transformed into a junkyard of the small, cracked pallets, cable ties, dented mesh trays, piles of thermal wrap kicked aside by hurrying feet. No weapons, the sign had promised. Debris, the station had in abundance. Plint, I said, voice low. Where's the nearest trash compactor? Behind Fish Tea, he said, bewildered. Why? Because Vescari confiscated my weapons. I slipped off a starfish slipper and flexed my toes, already measuring grip, leverage, the balance of a makeshift sling. They didn't confiscate my hands. Plint's mandibles clicked, something like laughter. Or despair. Humans. Yeah, I said, and pulled the slipper's foam insole free. We're the worst kind of compliant. Alarms flattened into a steady pulse that made my bones buzz, and that's when I decided panic was the loudest thing I carried. I needed quieter noise, work. Plint hustled me behind Fish T, shouldered aside a hatch labeled, "Do not," and revealed a trash compactor, boxy, dented, humming like a cat that eats wrenches. "Nia, map me a loop back to the Sparrow that never touches a camera," I whispered. "Impossible," she said. "But I can route you past cameras already broken." "I'll take optimistically pessimistic." The bin was a treasure chest of leftovers: mesh guard, cracked polycarbonate, ribbon cable, a drone's rotor cage, 2 heat-scarred magnetic clamps, a snapped oxygen hose, and a spool of elastic from starfish slipper shipping bands. I yanked the bands free. Tension. Projectile. The confiscation list had been projection, incision, abrasion. Fine. I would project with trash. "They will scan for weapons at the auction," Plint clacked. "Then we won't bring weapons," I said, threading bands through the rotor cage to form a cup and lashing it to hose. "We'll bring toys." You define toy strangely. Semantics are my armor. I twisted mesh into a springy track and taped it to a crate plank, improvising a slingshot staff long enough to pass as a walking stick. Rivets spilled from my pocket, gleaming. Ammo. I imagined the arc, the ricochet. Not deadly. Painful. Distraction. Jax, Nia clicked. The Tide deployed dockside suppressors. They'll damp combustion and hard radiation. Anything obvious gets eaten by the field. Good thing I'm making soft crimes. I lashed magnetic clamps to my forearms with thermal wrap. Enough charge to stick, peel, stick again. Plint, are Vescari's shutter control pins standardized? Yes. This is either fortunate or terrifying. Absolutely. I pried out a control pin from the compactor's panel and taped it along my palm. The station might call a screwdriver a weapon, it hadn't outlawed fingers. We moved. The concourse had collapsed into pockets of fear. On the far ring, 6 pirates in matte armor herded merchants before a holoslate announcing terms in 11 languages. The gist: pay us or watch us take. How long? I asked. 41 minutes, Nia said. The Sparrow's hatch shows a tamper flag. A crawler's sniffing for codes. Change the codes to a song only I know. You do not sing. Exactly. We skirted a maintenance corridor stinking of hot metal and coolant. Cameras blinked dead. A kid peered from a ventilation grate. I pressed a rivet into his hand. If anyone in matte armor grabs you, I whispered, hit their ankle from behind. Then run. What will it do? Make them swear. Humans. Plint trembled. Dock C-12 loomed. The Tide was all angles and legalese. Crew ran cable umbilicals to the auction platform, where a bureaucrat in pirate gray tapped a stylus. The Sparrow sat 2 piers down, patient, unaware. Suppressors will hate explosives, Nia said, but they do not care about pressure. Then let's give them pressure. I wedged the mesh track against a maintenance spine, loaded 3 rivets into the rotor cage cup, and drew the elastic until my shoulders groaned. I aimed not at helmets, but at a strand of cable drooping from the Tide's signal mast. Now? Plint whispered. On 2. Because no one expects it. I released on not 2. The rivets sipped, 3 bright bees, clattered through cable, sparked, and thunked into hull. For a breath, nothing, then the mast drooped, auction slate hiccuped, and the bureaucrat's voice stuttered into a bass gargle. Heads turned. Move, I said, and we did, sliding under gaze lines, magnets kissing steel as I climbed the service stanchion to the control loft. My palms burned. I pried the shutter with my pin, slipped inside, and found the panel feeding the dock doors. Any door you open will announce it opened, Nia warned. That's why we won't open a door. I rerouted the loft's test routine to Dock C14. Indicators cycled, hazard lights blinked, and 0 notifications fired. Pirates glanced at the false emergency. A loader drone panicked and dropped a crate that burst into edible glitter. I spent the moment like currency. Clamp, climb, pry, drop. At the Sparrow's hatch, a crawler clung like a silver spider. I braced the staff and fired a rivet into its sensor pod. It squealed, sparked, and fell. Plint stepped on it. Our auction of your ship, the bureaucrat shouted as systems rebooted, is delayed by technical unfortune. By me, I muttered, punching the hatch code that wasn't a song Nia had written, but the rhythm of my heartbeat the first time I saw space. The hatch sighed. Home breathed back. 2 problems, Nia said as we slipped inside. 1. The Tide captain filed an in-station lien on the Sparrow. 2. They brought a negotiator who loves humans. Loves? As in, collects? The iron taste of fear was a pearl seasoning for courage, but it made everything sharp enough to act. The Sparrow trembled beneath the Tide's boots, the negotiator's polished words floating like smoke over a crowd ready to trade freedom for a pleasing story. I kept my hands folded until the story finished. Then I unclenched them and set about breaking theater. Nia measured windows and spoke with the calm of a machine that had learned impatience. Opportunity window, 9 minutes, she said. I made it 8. They had muscle, an armored knocker and a squad trained to move like a single thought, and they had law, performed live by a man with cufflinks shaped like trophies. He presented his contract like scripture and expected obedience. Around him, merchants sobbed and pirates smiled as if smiling would make the taking cleaner. We had scrap and stubbornness. A walking stick hit a rotor that thrummed, magnets clasped to seams, and a spool of filament could sing metal. Plint held a crate like a battering ram. A child supplied rivets with the natural audacity of someone who had nothing left to lose. We arranged ourselves into an awkward orchestra. Phase 1 was noise. I struck the deck with my staff, letting the rotor's harmonics crawl into hull seams. The knocker's optic fluttered. Its servos hiccuped. A pirate lieutenant ordered a flank and his squad moved like a fist closing, but the fist slammed into confusion. Crates burst open into a scatter of spices and ribbons, sensors tripped on glint and rivet, and pirates stumbled on noise they could not parse. Nia fed the local comm mesh a timed static that bloomed into every earpiece connected to the auction. Their network tried to fix itself instead of fixing us. The knocker, trying to retune against false input, froze and struck a crate with a clanging thud that sounded like a mistake. The negotiator's smile thinned. They adapted. The lieutenant funneled his men toward the Sparrow's hatch, intent on sealing us in. That was when we moved to Phase 2, exploitation. I anchored a magnet to a seam and unspooled filament until it threaded like a line through an impossible groove. The rotor rose in pitch, the knocker's control loops mistook the tone for a systemic fault and stalled. In the pause the crowd shoved back. A merchant's shove began as a selfish act to save his wares and turned into collective force. People who had watched for a living suddenly acted. The lieutenant's squad hit a wall of bodies and momentum. One pirate fell and collided with the negotiator, sending his stylus clattering into the dust. The image of the man on the ground was louder than his speeches. The Tide reasserted with brute force. The knocker rebooted and slammed its weight into the deck like a falling tree. It dented plates and sparked, but each blow bought us time. Loading drones, conditioned to human motion, keyed on the hatch and began ferrying crates away from pirate hands instead of toward the auction. A jar of fermented kelp exploded into a stink that made visor HUDs useless. A mirror flashed blinding light into optics. Small, human things made the powerful clumsy. In the thick of it I met the negotiator's stare. He tried to raise authority but found only frantic faces. Plint, who could sell ice to a comet, howled and drove a hull plate into a pirate's knee. The pirate's hull cut through ceremony like a blade through paper. We did not win by weapon or law. We won because a platform of people decided to reclaim their things. The Tide bled dignity as merchants seized their crates, and shoved them toward the Sparrow's open bay. The hatch opened with torque where permits had been promised. We rolled out like something rescued rather than captured, messy, urgent, and ecstatic. When the Sparrow slipped its mooring and edged away from the platform, the knocker whimpered back to its masters and the negotiators slinked into gray to rewrite the evening as a delay. We left with dents and missing parts and a cargo manifest full of stories. Victory was porous. It guaranteed future consequences and debts. Still, it was ours, the kind built by people who could turn confiscated tools into instruments of escape. Above the station, stars ignored our triumph, but inside the hull there was laughter and the quick, private singing of survivors. We had made weapons from debris not to maim but to make space, space to breathe, to decide, to resist again. That was the lesson we carried, simple, human, stubborn. When law and muscle close a door, people will open new ones with whatever they have. It was ugly and beautiful and entirely human. We sailed onward, louder for what we had learned. The stars chased us for 3 days before we stopped running. The Sparrow's hull was scorched, our air filters smelled like panic, and the reactor whined every time Nia sighed. But we were alive, and that was something pirates couldn't auction. I sat in the cargo bay, surrounded by what we'd saved, half-melted panels, a heap of tangled wire, a crate of edible glitter that had somehow fused into a single shimmering brick. The others called it junk. I called it potential. Status? I asked. Stable enough for bad decisions, Nia replied through the ceiling speakers. Though your definition of weapons may need an update. The clamps are fused to your sleeves. They're bracelets now, I said, flexing my hands. The magnets hummed faintly, responding to the ship's pulse. Souvenir of a bad day. Plint clicked in agreement from the galley, polishing a dented hull plate with his forelimbs like it was a trophy. You built victory from debris, he said. The pirates built failure from confidence. This seems a moral equation. Morals are for people who still have jackets, I muttered. Outside, Vescari Freeport shrank into a pinprick. No alarms, no chase. The tide had licked its wounds and retreated to bureaucracy. They'd send forms before fleets. Pirates with paperwork hated chaos. They could sue over it. I leaned against the wall and watched our reflection ripple in the viewport glass. A human in slippers, an alien with a cracked shell, and a ship held together by memory and tape. It should have been absurd. It was absurd. But absurdity had kept us alive. Nia interrupted my reflection with her usual tact. Incoming signal. I tensed. From Vescari? From the kid? Static filled the bay, then a small voice. We hit ankles. We ran. We're free. Plint made a low, trilling sound that could have been laughter or grief. I smiled anyway. Good, I said. Tell them to keep hitting ankles. It's a start. The message ended, but the silence it left wasn't empty. It was proud. Humans had a way of making rebellion contagious. Later, as the Sparrow drifted toward the edge of map space, I walked the corridors, tracing each patch and weld we'd made. Every scar was a lesson, a reminder that rules designed to suppress ingenuity only fuel it. They'd taken my tools, thinking they'd taken my power. All they'd done was clear my hands to build something new. Nia dimmed the lights to a soft amber. You should sleep, she said. After I finished the reactor check? That is the 3rd time you've finished it. Then I'm being thorough. Or sentimental. She wasn't wrong. Humans don't build because they need to, we build because we can't stop. Give us ashes, we'll make bricks. Give us debris, we'll make defenses. Give us a cage, we'll turn the bars into an escape route. Plint appeared at the hatch, mandibles twitching thoughtfully. You will return to Vescari? Maybe someday, I said. But next time, I'll bring my own confiscation forms. He tilted his head. So you can keep what they take? So I can remind them what they can't. He laughed, a chittering sound that bounced against the bulkheads. Humans. You make danger seem optional. Danger's just opportunity wearing sharp corners, I said. We lifted our mugs, mine of lukewarm coffee, hiss of something that glowed, and clink them against the nearest bulkhead. The hull rang like a bell, and the sound traveled through the ship, into the dark, into the stars. As I stood there, listening to that thin note of defiance, I realized that the best weapon wasn't the slingshot, or the magnets, or even the cunning. It was the refusal to stop creating. Every confiscation, every loss, every attempt to tame the human impulse to build only made us more inventive. Somewhere out there, another station clerk was labeling a screwdriver potentially weaponizable. Good. They were right. Because in human hands everything is. And that's why the galaxy keeps trying, and failing, to disarm us. End of story.